Morning, everyone. This is Wesley Hudson, Chair of Prosperity and Livability Committee. I'd like to call our meeting to order. In council chambers today is Council Member Michael Holmes and Council Member Monica Peters and Cyril Jefferson are currently on the way to the meeting. I'd like to start off with an update on our Blair Coltrane House project, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Anique Oliver Brewer. I am the project manager for Blair Coltrane Home. As you well know, it's a special gem to our community, and so we have been working tirelessly, our group, to figure out programming that we want to have done. As a quick update, construction has started as of yesterday, I believe. And so thank you to all in the room who has helped with permitting and all those documents and things that we need to make sure that we're doing that correctly and on time, but we're really excited about that. And so what happens just on the construction side is there will be some restoration, of course. We don't want to compromise the integrity of the home, but we will be making it wheelchair accessible, so there'll be a ramp that's being built on the front, as well as some other details on the inside, which I won't go too much into today just because I want to make sure that we're speaking about programming. So essentially, with programming, I will be going through some conversations that I've had with the High Point Arts Council and Friends of John Coltrane, and then give you a bit of a timeline as to what we're thinking we can do. Now again, this is proposal, so there's a lot of other details that we need to continue to work at, think about, but essentially what you will see is what has come out of conversations that we've had and a brainstorm. So we have High Point Arts Council and Friends of John Coltrane, and we're thinking about community partnership in terms of youth and community as the programming, with Arts Council being able to help us with the more admin side, identifying and applying for grants, helping to further develop more programming, and helping entities that we engage with their administration. And then we look to Friends of John Coltrane as that left hand, so to speak, being the marketing arm, helping us reach potential donors. They have a huge following and community with the festival, and so really leveraging their influence to bring attention to the home. So with youth programming, of course, we thought that would be just a really great way to honor Coltrane as being a child in the community. And we wanted to make sure we kind of centered back to his formidable years and made sure that our community, our youth in the community, were being engaged in this way. And so in thinking of this, there are several different phases. The first would be youth instruction, private education, continuing on to figure out what that looks like as summer programming, and then beyond that, we have identified a strong need for after-school programming and possibly engaging the home in that way. So I'll begin to kind of go through that as well. This timeline takes us into fall of 2024. So our first phase would be July 2023 through September 2023. We've identified July because that is when we were hoping that our construction will be finished, and it'll give us some leeway with that. We've added a little bit of time at the end as well, because as we know, construction, not always a finite time. So we have considered that as well as a start time. But essentially, we've talked to the Gant School of Music, which is a organization based in the Triad. They go into many different schools in the area and give private instruction to students. They also supply them with instruments. And so we would really like to engage them and bring them into the home for a 12-week Coltrane cohort. So they would identify some great students, usually middle school through high school at that age, that could come together to create an ensemble, so to speak, and perform at the end of the festival, of the John Coltrane Festival. So it could either be a VIP event that they're working towards, but so to speak, with that time period between July and September, they're preparing for this event at the end. And the High Point Arts Council will kind of work with Gant School of Music in terms of their administration and registration and all those kind of admin needs that would be needed for that. So of course with this there's particular considerations, and the considerations are pretty consistent throughout every stage, of course. Insurance when we're bringing kids into the space, liability waivers. Our restroom facilities, we've kind of figured out at one point we thought we were going to have to take the restroom out of the home, but we've decided to keep it there, so that should be fine. But general facilities management, who are the key holders, and making sure that we are internet accessible in the home as well. So, phase 2. September 2023 to May 2024. So this is our fall area. We would like to continue private music education. So based on the success of the Gant School, how that worked for us, we'll kind of see how it goes from there. If it was a great relationship, great partnership, went well, we'd love to continue to engage them or identify other partners that may be able to do the same. But then also start to open up the home more for community organization meetings, utilize the backyard. It's a great, wonderful backyard. So I would love to get an amazing landscaper there for that and start to have things outside in the warmer months, events, receptions. Also engaging a Coltrane experience tour. So we would work with the museum to kind of create a whole immersive experience for those who are wanting to know about his early years that can go from the museum to the home, to the statue, to the high school, to Penn Griffin, et cetera, et cetera. And then also engaging local artists for artist salons and collaborations, meaning just coming to the home, writing together, creating together, just being a creative flex space for artists in the area. Again, the same considerations would be needed, insurance, waivers, et cetera. So, phase 3. May 2024 through August 2024. This is the summer months, summer programming. So naturally, we would need all that time from September on to be planning for the summer. What summer can look like, though, is kind of identifying what partners we could work with. The Hallam isn't that big to be hosting a full summer program all day, 7 a.m. to 6. But what we can do is work with local organizations to have field trips come in, to have particular things certain days of the week, et cetera, et cetera. And we would be turning to High Point Arts Council to hopefully identify and apply for those grants, develop the programming, admin, et cetera, identifying and engaging different partners. And lastly, a possible after-school program. So after summer is done next year, going and figuring out how we can regularly use the space for some sort of after-school programming that's regular. Again, this could also be private instruction, community, that type of thing, but just making sure that we have identified a strong partner to help us do that consistently, as well as identify how we can get transportation from different schools to the location or to nearby. And so with that, again, we have right arm, left arm, High Point Art Council, identifying grants, helping us to further develop the programming and engage with certain partners, and then Friends of John Coltrane, helping us to reach out for donors and use their marketing arm. So our next steps, we are hoping to continue conversations like this, engage with the community and ask them how they feel about this proposal. In particular, the people in that neighborhood. We don't want to be disturbing of that neighborhood and bring a lot of noise. We're not going to have a whole lot of drum classes and things that would be a disturbance. We really want this to be part of the community that they feel is theirs. And so we'll begin to have some of those conversations with the neighborhood and say, this is what we're thinking, but how do you feel about that and what do you feel would really help? And then we also need to really identify kind of the entity or whomever would be at the top of all this, having the conversation between Arts Council and Friends and keeping that together. As you know, right now with the construction of the home, the High Point Preservation Society has stepped up to organize that, and that's whom I've been working with closely. However, once construction is done, we still need to figure out who's going to be at the top of that helm to continue the programming. Agreements and contracts, of course, made aware with Friends of John Coltrane, Arts Council, and the city to make sure that those roles are clearly defined. And then identify just additional partners locally. I have had several people and companies reach out to me. They're very excited about this, as are we. However, I've kind of made sure we've paused to make sure that we are identifying the best fit according to the programming. We don't want someone who is, far left of what we're doing and not as focused on youth programming. So with that in mind, identifying those who are going to be great partners to us locally, nationally, even globally. I've had people from all over the place interested in what High Point is doing with this program, but we want to make sure that we are, like I said, having the right relationships when it comes to that. And then who fundraises for what, right? When we're talking about grants, we're talking about that. Is it Friends of John Coltrane? Is it High Point's Art Council? Where is the money coming from? How is it coming from? We know that there are several different programs going on in the city that we're going to make sure we engage and apply for, of course, but also making sure that we continue to have that, especially if we're engaging our youth. We don't want to let them down and bring them into a program that's not going to be consistent for them and help them reach their goals of performance and education around their music experience. So that is it. I'm absolutely able to take questions. I don't know how many I'll be able to answer, but I hope I can. And if you have any questions for me, I'm glad to answer them now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Update. Thank you. Go ahead.
So thank you for this update. I'm really encouraged by this, very broad but very organized approach at getting this out in the community. So speaking of which, maybe I misunderstood earlier. Were you saying that you would organize events in specific communities if requested, or I think you said something about a tour? Is that tour of the city? Would that be organizing events in say, specific areas and parts of the city? If someone was to want to organize something like that?
So our idea would basically be a self-guided kind of tour. So they would probably start at the museum and then be able to log into the app, and then the app will tell them kind of what the next step is, and they'd be going on a kind of tour that way. Also then having tours which would be, if they are guided, if there's a large group that needs a guided tour, but really kind of working closely with Edith Brady and the museum to make that happen.
So hypothetically, if there was a youth group that could contact you guys and say, hey, we wanted to do a guided tour, you could organize that.
Absolutely.
Great. All right. Summer concerts, or any of that on the horizon?
Well, again, we want to be conscious of the neighborhood,
Sure.
right? So we want to make sure that if we do anything like that, it would be in association with what's happening on Washington Street.
Gotcha.
And, make sure that we're not doing anything that would just be a huge disturbance. Now, if it is something where it's in the backyard, it's intimate, the noise isn't carrying too much, we let our neighbors know. And, of course, we've already spoken to the neighbors around there and passed out information as well. So the direct neighbors who are very, very kind and understanding. But I would say we would just be sensitive to that, that timing, yeah.
And Titus Gant does do a lot of concerts at the Arts Council. He does a program to the Arts Council stage.
Yeah. And then, like you said, so we could also utilize Arts Council facilities in association with that if we wanted to do something a little bigger, louder.
Any other questions, comments? This is wonderful.
Yeah.
This is wonderful to come across
Great.
the desk.
Ron,
Really impressed.
can you send us all, can you email us all this PowerPoint?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
It's on your.
Is it?
OneDrive.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah.
All right, good.
It's on OneDrive for you.
Great.
Yeah, Chairman Hudson, I just want to say thank you to Ms. Oliver Brewer, not only for coming in today, but for all the incredible work she's done, project managing with the Coltrane project. This has been a labor of love, a labor of certainty for the past, I guess it's been 4 years, y'all, since we formed this project. And to get it where it's at right now, I mean, there's been a number of stakeholders, some of you all in the room who have been with us on this journey, as well as folks in the community. And we're extremely grateful for the collaboration and the buy-in that we've gotten from stakeholders, from people who live in those neighborhoods, from the arts organizations and Friends of John Coltrane who have been at the tables with us. And Anique's really helped us get organized and get forward thinking in terms of what's happening next. And so it's so critical that this body be aware of all those things happening next, because I think it'll be the kind of situation that as it picks up that kind of momentum, it's really going to take off. And so uber excited, because that area of town right there on Washington Street means so much to our city. It's right in the heart of the core of our city. And so incredible opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much. So our next item, let's move on to the city-sponsored special events.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll talk about that a little bit. As you know, we bring this, since 2018, we have brought a list to Prosperity and Livability and to City Council to consider. The intent of this is to identify those larger events in the community that are typically run by another organization, but that are partnered and sponsored by the city. And these are larger events, not small events that don't require much support from the city. And the support that we provide are typically in-kind services such as police services, public solid waste, garbage collection, parks and rec services, and transportation for road closures and things like that. So we have presented a list of 17 that are on the agenda. A couple of changes that we made from last year. One is just to identify that Keep High Point Beautiful holds 4 events a year, but not to try to name those because they need some flexibility there. The other one that was added is the Carl Chavis YMCA Juneteenth Festival. The other thing that we have before you is the Visit High Point has provided a list of events that they intend to hold and are asking for sponsorship. Within that list, there are 2 that were already on our sponsorship list, but there are another 5 that are not currently on our sponsorship list, and those are listed here as well. And we'd just like to present that list to you for consideration and discussion.
Any questions on them? These are fairly straightforward now. If not, I'll make a motion to approve 2023-071.
Second?
There's a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes, and we'll go with the consent agenda. Let's move to 2023-070. This is an update regarding our street closure policy. This is Mr. Duquesne.
Good morning, Chairman, members of the committee. Damon Duquesne, Assistant City Manager. I'm pinch hitting for our favorite Transportation Director, Mr. Greg Venable. Greg, this is Greg's presentation to you, by the way. I don't want to take any credit for the hard work that went into this. So we wanted to give the committee some information on the process for street closings, the different types of street closings, and maybe use and introduce you to a term called tactical urbanism, which I think some of you have thrown around without knowing what the actual term was. So we'll cover that as well. So permanent street closures, you're familiar with these. You're typically coming to you in the form of through the development process. And we've brought some recently related to HPU where they have purchased properties and want to do some development. They'll permanently close that street. And so there's a state statute that governs that process. You all adopt a resolution. There's 4 consecutive weeks of it being published in the paper. The adjoining property owners are noticed. There's a public hearing. And at the end of it all, should the street be closed, then the ownership of that right-of-way, that closed right-of-way, goes basically from the center out to the adjoining property owners. And then if there are easements and things like that, because in a lot of cases, if it was an active right-of-way, there could be water, sewer, or electric in there, and we want to keep those easements, so that's what will happen there. It's a very busy slide, but it basically demonstrates our process, and it has the street abandonment policy to the side there. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'll just move on to the next one. So as part of the process, obviously, the city staff needs to take a look at a new request for a street closure. And these are some of the things that we take into consideration when someone comes in and says, I'd like to permanently close right away. If it's a signalized intersection, how does that get handled? Private property accesses. Sometimes that public right-of-way, even though it may not be well-maintained or maintained at all, provides access to a property that could be landlocked otherwise. Pedestrian issues, increased traffic on adjacent streets. If you close a street, the traffic that went down that street has to go somewhere, and so that could increase traffic flow on adjacent streets. Connectivity, is this a key to a route for EMS or fire response or public safety responses? You know, is this going to create an issue with getting to the hospital, for example? Or is this going to slow down transit's ability to get to and from dialysis on a regular schedule for some of our riders who have that service? So those are all things we have to take into consideration. And typically, we like to do a traffic study that goes with this to kind of help us figure all that out. There are pros and cons to everything, right? So pros, there's pedestrian safety can be improved. There can be public space that is created. And I've got an example to show you in a moment on a map where you can free up some real estate to do things on and where the street used to be. And there can be an improved quality of life. So if there's not traffic somewhere, that provides more opportunities for people to enjoy the space. And it can be more walkable. The cons are you can cause unintentional harm to businesses, for example. So if they need deliveries from trucks to their front door and you close that street, that could be an issue. Like we talked about, impact to adjacent roads. You reduce the amount of on-street parking. While they might not be an issue in certain portions of the city, right, like our central business district, we have tons of parking. It could be a problem elsewhere. Emergency access, and then increased speed on adjacent roads. I'll demonstrate that in a moment, and reduce connectivity that we already talked about. So let's look at Church Avenue, for example. That's a good one. It's right by the Catalyst project, and that line is skewed. It wasn't like that on the slides when I put them together. So I hope everybody knows where Church doesn't run where that red line is. So for example, if you close Church, there are businesses there who could be impacted. And one of the unintended consequences of closing a street that has a signalized intersection, and there are remedies to all of these things. I'm just part of the discussion. And again, if you have any questions, it can actually increase speed on Main Street because now you've reduced the need for that light at that intersection. And I catch myself all the time doing 45 on Main Street. I tend to have a heavy foot. So, but I'm self-aware, so I slow down, right? So that's one of the unintended consequences. So while you're trying to increase walkability, you can also have that ancillary problem that surfaces. But you can see that would be a pretty cool opportunity, right, to free up some real estate and make better use of that space. Half of the ownership of those properties would go towards I'll say the north side, towards the top of the screen, and then the other would go towards the side that has the church on it. And so there could be some interesting opportunities there. But does anybody have any questions so far?
Well, I'll just point out one of the great opportunities of that is if you close Church Street, and this is an arbitrary street. This is not. I don't want people to
right.
get the notion that we're
We chose this because it was an
Yes,
easy
it's
example.
an easy one. What it gives you the opportunity to do is to put dining on the business side. It allows the businesses to put displays on the front to have. It just opens up an awful lot of great real estate to do on street, although it's a sidewalk.
Yes, sir. And so I'm gonna get into temporary street closures here in a moment. And so even if you can't permanently close a street, you can temporarily close a street and achieve some of those same goals, right? So COVID allowed municipalities to start thinking in this tactical urban kind of way, right? Like how can we help out our businesses? How can we get people out, keep them safe, and utilize our existing infrastructure? So the term streetery came up, right? Where people would move their stuff, just like the chairman described, out into the street. And so we would do temporary street closures to allow for that. It happened all over the place, Wilmington and Winston-Salem and Raleigh and all these other great places. So temporary street closures are a tool that municipalities can use and effectively, too, to achieve a lot of things. So it's basically a temporary street closure. It can be a council request. It can be an HPDOT assessment. Other city departments need to be involved, just like with a regular street closure. We don't want to temporarily close something without checking with everybody, because we don't want to hamper anybody's ability to provide service. For temporary street closures, we like to notify the adjacent property owners because they could be affected by it. Most of the times, they're the ones that are requesting it. Public notification, put something in the paper that says, hey, this street is going to be closed between these dates. Need you to be aware of that. And then we prefer that the city does the street closure, because there's a book out there that we follow called the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, affectionately referred to as the MUTCD. And that's what people all across the nation refer to, so that we all use similar standards. So if you're coming from Kentucky and you're in High Point, traffic control looks the same as you would expect in Kentucky, for consistency purposes.
Hey, I
So,
have a question.
yes, ma'am.
Has anybody made a request to close Church Street?
No, ma'am.
Okay.
No, that was just an
That's
arbitrary
weird.
example.
Okay.
There's a better one that's a little further up by Paddled South.
Okay,
That
okay.
would be a better example probably, but Greg created this about a month and a half ago, so
Okay,
I
okay.
didn't want to.
Well, it's just funny because recently there was that block party. I guess, I don't know who all knew that there was a block party.
Mardi Gras.
Yeah, the Mardi Gras block party. And anyway, there's always people that are complaining, but a lot of, not the business owners, but folks that were just out there were kind of saying, well, why didn't the city close off some streets? This isn't really a block party, and kind of blaming it on the city. And I'm like, the city doesn't do it unless there's a request. So if they had requested that we do, I said, so we need to make sure that the communication is always open, because the city, we want to help. And so, I feel like I have to defend the city a lot, and I'm just like, okay, you have to ask. You have to ask.
Yeah, yes,
So
ma'am.
anyway.
We appreciate that, and absolutely. Just reach out to us, and we'll be
Right.
happy to work it out. And like I said, not every situation is perfect, but we can typically find some way to make something work
Yeah,
that will benefit
absolutely.
everyone. Temporary street closures, there are city initiated, like I talked about, the council, for the events that you just approved. We're going to require some street closures. Departments, if we're doing construction and maintenance projects, we're going to have a large water main, et cetera. Furniture market is one. Again, it gets reviewed by all city departments. Public initiated special event permits. I'm going to cover that in a moment. We have a process for that. We can be a little flexible depending, but the more notice we can get, the better. Again, all the departments review it, and it's in our Acela Citizen Access Portal, which is basically our permitting software that helps us track it, make sure everybody gets it that needs it, and then the citizen or the requestor can go in there and check the status of it at any time. It's very nice. I'm going to read this verbatim to you. I'm not. So it's temporary street closure examples. Everybody has seen these. They can be closed for any number of reasons. Market, everybody's familiar when they put the point out there on Commerce. These are regular temporary street closures that happen a couple of times a year that we're all familiar with. And I think this is the end of the slide. So what I wanted to do was mention something called tactical urbanism. So a lot of times DOT is asked, especially from a neighborhood standpoint, and throughout my career we've been asked, like, hey, can we do something in our neighborhood to help children access the local school or something like that because there's too much traffic and these sorts of things. So traditionally, DOT departments, they're full of engineers. I have an engineering degree myself, so I get it, are like, well, we have a process and we like to look at these numbers and we want to do these things, and that will tell us what we're going to do. Well, that doesn't always necessarily lead to a solution, right? Because sometimes the numbers and things don't apply exactly as we anticipate they will, right? We can model things, but reality is always different than the model. So along that vein, this tactical urbanism, and not that we want people running around in camouflage putting out traffic control devices on their own, but what we do is we want to take a look at, can we put temporary measures in place to sort of test some ideas and theories? So what data may show is a good idea to close a street permanently. We could go out and temporarily close it for 30 to 60 to 90 days or at different times a year, depending, especially in High Point because we're unique in that respect, and see if it works. See if the data matches or if it doesn't. And then we can adjust, and then we could do the permanent fixes or modifications at the end of the day. And so our new director loves that idea. The manager's office is very supportive of it. We hope you are too. And so as ideas are brought to you and you bring them to the manager, well, that's kind of the approach we're going to take is we'll do the regular analysis, and if it warrants moving forward to see if it will work or how we can accommodate, say, a street fair or other things, we're going to give it a shot. And if it works out permanently, then we'll go ahead and make the full investment on those sorts of improvements. So with that, on behalf of Director Venable, I was pleased to be here and present to you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, I appreciate this presentation and Monica's points about, or sorry, Councilwoman Peters' points about the Mardi Gras Block Party, well noted, because that was actually ended up turning out to be a great activating event for our downtown. And actually on that day, oddly enough, there were multiple things going on, and several of those locations didn't even know that other folks had things going on, but we ended up being lucky that on that Saturday from 10 in the morning till probably 2 in the morning the next day, that entire sort of right adjacent proximity to our stadium was activated because TAG had its opening. At the baseball stadium, they had a huge soccer tournament that I think PTFC hosted, and there were probably at least a couple thousand people there for that. And so then when I got there that morning, you had TAG having lots of foot traffic, stadium having lots of foot traffic. All these folks are going into the food hall to enjoy themselves. Then you go out on Church Street, and as it went into the evening, that was really activated. So food hall and Church Street were really jumping. And the opportunity presented itself where as you start to look and said, man, if this could have been closed, that would have been awesome. And I asked some of the shop owners there, and I said, did y'all request it? They said, no, we didn't even really think to do it. We kind of came up with this last minute. And so it was one of those things where it said, you know, in the future, if the opportunity presents itself to do that, this is a home run.
Yeah.
It also made me think about all those folks who do stuff in downtown at the same time, and no one has any idea that someone else is doing something. And there were some missed opportunities. For example, stadium, they sent everyone into that soccer tournament. Sorry, I'm saying it on the record just so everyone knows. They sent everyone into that soccer tournament from the Lindsay Street side. And I said, well, that's interesting. We've got a food hall on the Elm Street side. It would be great if they were going into the Elm Street side, so now everyone has to see Pop's Mini Donuts, and then you either have to give them to your desires or not. But either way, there is more patronage. Sorry, I'm not trying to judge folks. I'm not trying to judge folks. You can actually order online now. I just got that text from them. You can actually order online and pick up. But it forces you to have to make a decision now. And then if you're going on the Elm Street side, maybe you see the Church Street stuff going on and all the other good stuff. So all that to say, I know we have a staff who does an incredible job of working with folks whenever they reach out. The hope is that more folks reach out and we get more stuff coordinated, or and to some degree, what our coordination looks like proactively to know who's doing what. And granted, y'all, I don't know how we fix it, but knowing who does what, so we can have some of those intentional conversations to say, hey, stadium, if you're bringing 2,000 people in, let's talk about that, right? Let food hall know what's happening, shops know, because some of the shops are like, man, if we didn't know 2,000 people were coming, we'd have had bigger signs up, come stop by, yada, yada, yada. So I think while we're in this early downtown activation phase, there's some things that we're going to have to do that a traditional, well-established downtown may not have to do right now. But I think we have to do it to be very intentional to capitalize on when momentum picks up. And that could look at not only big signage and coordinating through communications, but hey, on this day, let's go ahead and do a street closure and make it a big block party. And I'll tell you, the folks who were in town for that tournament, there was someone literally in town from Charlotte, Virginia, Texas. Georgia. And I was talking to them, and they were like, man, so cool to come to a stadium, see this kind of food hall that's right next door. We didn't even have to get in our cars. This is so awesome. We're going to come here more often. And in my mind, I'm like, man, you came here when only like 4 vendors are open. I can't imagine how you feel when the whole food hall is activated.
Exactly.
And then Condon Yards and everything else is going.
Yeah.
And so I think if we can get really, really intentional about those kinds of opportunities. For example, Andrews versus Central game is tonight, and it'll be an incredible game, especially for Red Raiders. But that is tonight, and so sorry, y'all, I'm just straightforward. That's tonight, and that's a great opportunity, I think, to sort of capitalize on too. So.
Yeah. And if I could just say one thing real quick. So first of all, it is so refreshing to have these wonderful out-of-the-box ideas coming from staff. Thank you so much. It is so refreshing. So, and then also, I just wanted to say, I know that Rebecca McGee, the executive director for Forward High Point, is really busy with the whole strategic plan, but I know that her and Melody Burnett with Visit High Point work closely on the events calendars and stuff. So, you know, maybe, and I don't mind reaching out, or if we like look at some of the calendars that we have, and maybe, and I know the staff is really super busy, and I don't know if there could be like maybe a point person that just every once in a while, you know, looks at the calendar and reaches out to maybe Melody or Rebecca and say, we see some things going on, what can the city do? Or I'll make sure that they know to kind of make sure that somebody from the city knows that, so that we can start being really super proactive with that.
Can I tag on to that? Because it's actually already been done. I want to make sure everybody knows this is a thing. It's exactly what you said. Rebecca has gotten together all the business owners for the
Right.
entire uptown as well as downtown, so the whole mixed use as well. So they are meeting once a month, and it's actually right now that they're meeting. It's during this meeting. It's the first Wednesday of every month at 9 o'clock. Visit High Point, you're right, has created a citywide calendar. If you send a text email to Visit High Point and say, I want my events to be included on that calendar, if an event is added to your calendar, it automatically goes on Visit High Point. So if Paddled South has an event, you know, if Plank Street has a singer coming in, if they put it on their calendar, it automatically goes to the Visit High Point calendar. So the Visit High Point calendar is the master calendar.
It's amazing.
It is,
So
it is a wonderful calendar.
Is there somebody from staff that is part of that email thread?
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Okay.
So to the points of all three, unless you want to weigh in too, sir. All right. So to that point, yes, city staff is partnered with, of course, Visit High Point, Forward High Point, on this very issue, right, of special events. And does the right hand know what the left hand is doing versus the left foot and the right foot? Because there are a lot of great things going on, and how do we coordinate that better? So yes, to all of you, city staff is engaged in that process already. The site that the chairman mentioned is on the front of our webpage. So you can access it there. You can access it a bunch of other different ways. And we're working internally behind the scenes, the three organizations, to make sure that information is shared, because there are, you know, our Parks and Rec department does a lot of great events too. And so when you throw that on top of the mix of the local businesses, the Visit High Point events, and all those other things, it's a lot. So we're trying to take that special event process and do some things and engage some departments that haven't been in the past to kind of really be proactive in that regard. So yes, we're on board with that, and everybody's trying to move forward at the same pace.
So share that with your stakeholders as well. It's on the city website. You just have to scroll down to the
Right.
bottom, and it's there. And
Yeah.
It's on Visit High Point's website, right on the.
Oh, no, that's
Yes, sir.
awesome. I just want to make sure, because like the Mardi Gras,
Yep.
like, I don't know why that wasn't on somebody's radar to think about a temporary street closure. So that's kind of, I'm just trying to, you know,
Yep.
put that
Yes, ma'am.
piece together with
Getting
that.
everybody used to that fall, like Paddle South. They did their 1-year anniversary. They closed
Right.
Richardson Street and had a great event there. They closed it for the day. It's a great event, easy event, easy for us, easy for them, successful. So hopefully we get more of those temporary closures like that. So great report. Thank you.
Yes, sir, my pleasure.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Yeah, Chairman Hudson, most of us are aware that within the coming months, a special blend will be opening, probably sometime in the summer. And the only reason why I'm bringing it up now is so that way we just have a few months, several months to be thinking about that. Because where they're at in terms of being right there on Main Street, almost a block or half block south of where Paddle South is at, and that's right at an area where we've talked about intersections and the ability to cross Main Street. And so I just, again, I think we've got a several-month runway to be thinking about something that can be done, only because my heart breaks to imagine that opening up and then folks wanting to go potentially patronize a special blend and folks crossing that street and how tough it can be trying to cross that street. And so it's something if it's possible, Chairman Hudson, I don't know, because I know we've looked at that once, and there's a Main Street study that's more long-term to look at Main Street. But I am curious, because at one point we looked at how when you try to use that intersection, it doesn't exactly it's not very pedestrian responsive. And then the fact that where folks are crossing at, not everyone crosses at Church intersection. Where Paddle South and where Special Blend are at, they're north of that. And so I'm just mindful of, does there need to be some kind of intersection right there at Richardson? Kind of like, I guess in front of where Bank of America's at? I don't know. And like and granted, I don't know, because I do want to slow down traffic on Main Street. So actually, I think the last thing on my mind is how that impacts people wanting to drive on Main Street. That's the last thing on my mind. I think what's on my mind is businesses coming there now, and we've got a few month runway before a Special Blend goes in there. And they've got special populations coming in there. So that's the other thing I think we need to keep in mind too.
Yeah.
So.
Yes, sir.
We'll tag off of that, First Methodist Church, it's part of First Methodist complex. So First Methodist Church's parking lot is used for a Special Blend, so they do have a designated parking lot. Greg Venable and I talk about Main Street all the time. The pedestrian crossing in front, he and I have both visited, and it's working. It's a within 20 seconds of pushing the button, you cross. You have to wait 20 seconds, though. I will say that. If you're impatient with pedestrian crossing, there's not a lot we can do with it, but if you push the button there, within 20 seconds, you can cross.
If the cars stop.
Well, that's a stoplight.
I know, but I'm just
That's a
saying,
designated
because
stoplight, yeah.
just to say, it's, even the planners that were here last week, when they were talking about the crosswalk at GTCC,
Right.
they almost got run over. So, we can talk about the dangers of Main Street, but we've really got to do something about it, because,
That's also a yellow light rather than a stoplight. This is a red, green light
Yeah.
designated intersection. So that one works. Ferris and Main has a new pedestrian crossing. That one works same way. Within 20 seconds, you'll get that light. So we are addressing those. Yes, GTCC and brown truck crossing, those are still cautionary. So we're still working on those.
Yeah.
So anything
Would
further?
it be too much? So thank you for talking about Church Street.
Yeah.
So to my point about where Richardson is at in front of Bank of America, is that too much to at least look at what it's like to, and I don't know what the rules are in terms of how far apart by meters you can have these kind of crosswalks, but I think about the fact, one, we did enact a social district there too, and we stretched it across Main Street to cover Paddle South, and if I'm not mistaken, Nomad Wineworks too, I think.
It actually goes all the way to Hamilton. It's a square.
So it goes all the way to Hamilton. So it includes Nomad Wineworks and all that.
Yeah.
And so incredible opportunities for those businesses to be patronized, for someone, for example, to park at the food hall and eat some food and do a little bit of bar hopping if they wanted to. But I'm thinking about where people cross at. Maybe they cross at Church, but you just think about literally where Richardson is. You've got Special Blend, Paddle South, Nomad, and they're literally right there. And there's a parking lot, like you said, First Methodist. I think you all park in Truist, don't you?
Special Blend is on the south side.
Yeah, it's on the south side, but in terms of where you all park.
It's at Church Street. It's directly, if you drive Church Street, it drives directly into Special Blend. So the church has the parking lot between First Methodist and the towers. That's the actual designated church parking lot. We own that space. So Special Blend is off of that parking lot.
Okay.
If you take Church Street, it'll go right in the front door of Special Blend.
Noted, where Paddle South Parkers Park is right over there in Truist, and then Nomad Wineworks is right back there too. So think about how folks cross those streets. And heck, I'm not trying to make us waste time for waste time's sake. I think what I've seen is a lot of people do not cross at Church. A lot of people do cross right there in front of Bank of America, especially because they may be seeing, oh crap, you've got a lobster food truck in front of Paddle South. And do they say, let me go a quarter mile back up to Church to cross? They want to cross right then and there. So I don't know. If it's too far-fetched to look at crossing right at Richardson, I don't know if it is. Sure. In my mind, I think it's worth looking at, because if it increases safety, even just marginally, it is worth it, in my opinion.
Yes, sir, we'll take a look at it.
Yeah, especially, and I think we've almost all conceded that Main Street at this point is a highway with sidewalks.
Yeah. Deputy manager and I are taking a pretty concise look at that area. Let's put that on our radar as well. Anything further? Great conversation.
Thank you.
Let's go to the human relations. I have a 6-month work plan to take a look at.
We're getting the presentation set up for anyone online. But welcome, Council. Thank you for having me and to present this. I'm Race McCrae, the Human Relations Manager. While we're getting this set up, I'll just give you the set stage. That every 6 months, the Human Relations Council or Commission revisits its work plan. Typically, we establish a new work plan in January of each year, and then we revisit in July if there are new items that need to be added or if there are any items that need to be completed. In 2022, we established a work plan that I will cover in the presentation to talk about how that went. In July of 2022, there were no changes, which is why we didn't come back to council to address that. Ultimately, we go through this process at a retreat every year, and this year was a little bit different in that we had our retreat, but also with a lot of the commission items, we ran into overlaps with other boards and commissions, and so you'll see that has shaped our approach this year, especially with some of the ongoing discussions with the One High Point Commission, with the Citizens Advisory Council, and with some of the other work being done by city divisions and departments. So we will be talking about the previous work plan in 2022 and how we came about that, and then we'll also be talking about the new work plan, and I'm also going to give you an update on our subcommittees. As you recall from last year, we previously had 2 subcommittees, our international subcommittee and our interfaith subcommittee. Last year, we also made the request to add a social justice subcommittee, so this has been the first year. However, those subcommittees, this has kind of been a rebuilding year. During the COVID pandemic, we actually temporarily paused on all of our subcommittee work. So those were not meeting for 2 or 3 years at all. And as such, a lot of 22 was spent just rebuilding the community support and engagement for those. So when you're going to be looking at that work, a lot of what's ongoing now in those subcommittees is the outreach of, or the ultimate effect of the outreach of many months of just building up community work where they weren't doing anything active in a sense. You wouldn't have seen any actions being taken or events being planned or items being put forward to the commission, but there was ongoing discussions, there was ongoing recruitment and ongoing engagement. So those are ultimately the things that you're going to be hearing about. In lieu of the presentation, while we're getting that loaded up, I will note, go through a little bit of our previous work plan. So there were 3 work plan items that were presented to you last year and approved at your council meeting. The first was an outreach to the Latinx community. And that was, it was an intentionally vague idea that we wanted to see what could we do to kind of get greater engagement and outreach to all of our Latinx residents here in High Point. Ultimately, that was given to our international subcommittee as something to kind of help develop since they're already actively engaged with that population. And what they identified was that the city, and this is something that's been kind of an ongoing conversation nationally, that the city could look into adopting a language access plan. This is something that various departments across the city already have to have a language access plan, and other departments do not. Usually this is dependent on our engagement with the federal government in some way. So a good example is our community development department, because they have the grants that they receive from HUD, they need to have a language access plan of some kind. Same with our transit department and any kind of department that's receiving funds. However, customer service doesn't necessarily have to have one, but they would probably benefit from having one. This was identified as an initiative that ultimately the city should engage in. And somewhat conveniently, some of you may remember the UNC's program that's the Building Integrated Communities that the city was involved in, received a grant for a little under a decade ago. They started a new initiative this year called the Language Access Collective. And it's exactly what we were looking for. It's to gather together municipalities and counties that are interested in developing a language access plan and providing a year's worth of guidance in the development of that, expertise, and ultimately even some funding to implement some of the initiatives that come out of that language access plan. We applied in August. Thank you to the mayor and the city manager for writing letters of support in that application. And we partnered with the YWCA's Latino Family Center as part of that application, and we were accepted into the Language Access Plan, Language Access Collective, and ultimately that is going to be something then that we are pursuing throughout this year. So I will move into that. That's the middle column here. I went out of order. And so the Language Access Collective is ultimately something that we are pursuing right now on a monthly basis. We have engaged a team of members across the city, various departments that will all be a part of this development process, and then will ultimately be bringing that language access plan back to city leadership and city council for consideration upon completion. We expect that that work will continue on into probably 2024, because it takes a while to develop these plans. They're extremely comprehensive and involved.
Can I ask a question about that? Can other
Please.
entities join on to that, like a high school, Southwest and High Point Central?
So it would typically not be that way. The reason being that it would be, a language access plan is more like a set of policies that you yourself choose to follow. So it's no different than developing, say, customer service, our guidelines for how we interact with, say, mental health complaints, or the police department saying this is when we do or do not use force or pull over someone who's speeding. So it's those kind of policies that are usually specific to the organization. I would be happy to share with and discuss our language access plan process with any interested community organization or school. I think we can only benefit in that regard, but ultimately it will be a comprehensive policies that will say, for example, it might say, if someone with limited English proficiency approaches the customer service desk and says, I need to pay a light bill, but I don't know how to read this because I don't speak English, what would they do? And we would be laying out a policy of, here's what you do if we need to hire an interpreter. Here's already a company that we have contracted with, so we're not just calling up a random person and saying, do you speak, you know.
So this is separate.
So this is separate from that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I'm happy, because I think schools often do have that. If they would like to have a conversation with me or any of our team members about that, I'm happy to share that information, what we've learned, and what the process looks like for us. I'll go back to the first column there. So these are the 2022 approved work plan items. So they should look somewhat familiar. The first column was establish a Human Relations Youth Council. This was something that we developed over the course of 2022, and that included engaging with Guilford County Schools staff and thinking through what would look best in terms of a Human Relations Council. As you may recall, we had a student human relations function. This was about a decade ago, and we were looking to do something slightly different. Of note, also, there are other youth councils in the city already that are run in our Parks and Rec department, and also a student ambassador program through Keep High Point Beautiful, and other ways for students to get involved. We did submit an initial proposal to the city manager for review, and she had some very helpful feedback on how we might adapt that given all of those constraints, and made some suggestions. So we're currently, staff are currently revising that proposal for further reconsideration. By the time that, of course, feedback and development process was engaged, we were already in the middle of the school year, so now we're aiming to launch this in the next school year of 2023-2024. So we'll be coming back to the city leadership with a revised proposal in a short while. The third item that we looked was explore ways to bridge the gap between the community and law enforcement. And this produced some wonderful conversations. This was some of the initial work that our Social Justice Committee took on, that they were specifically meeting with the police, and the police also met with the full commission as well. And we did a great job of learning about the current outreach efforts that the HPPD is doing, and also discussed some community opportunities that the committee members and the commission were aware of. Ultimately, our work was running parallel to some of the work that the One High Point commissioners were doing in terms of identifying possible ways for that commission to discuss the police and in police engagement with the community. And so while that was ongoing, we were having those conversations and sharing some of that information through our council representative, which is Councilman Johnson. He is also on the One High Point Commission, and therefore at a certain point we realized that we're duplicating work. And so we paused that work plan item in the hopes that we'll wait to see what the One High Point Commission does in their temporary actions, and then once they come back with their recommendations, that may be something that the Human Relations Commission can help facilitate, and maybe not, and we'll just see where that falls. However, we did continue to build a partnership with the HPPD, which I think was a wonderful outcome of that. Major Petula Sellers has been at a number of our commission meetings aside from working on this specific item, and also we've been engaging with them through their impact team, which was another kind of parallel organization that was doing some of the same work. So lots of great work that they did in 2022 in terms of exploring these. I'm looking forward to the results of these initiatives, and as we continue to kind of build them out, I think they'll be really exciting. As such, though, that all of that, the way that played out, did ultimately shape our 2023 work plan items, especially with the overlap of different commissions and boards doing other work. So with the One High Point Commission, as they were doing this, and then we had to pause an item, when they started developing this at their retreat in January, they would come up with very wonderful ideas of things they might want to work on, and then it would be like, well, is One High Point working on this? Is the Citizens Advisory Council working on this? Is this something already that the police or another department is already doing? And they realized that this isn't something that we have codified in any specific way. Although they could ask staff for this information, and we were happy to give it to them, there was no one source of information for how to develop a work plan and how to consider these other things. So ultimately, they wanted to resolve that. So they're seeking to study where the HRC fits within the city and can be most effective among these boards and commissions and among other local HRCs who are operating in Greensboro, Durham, Charlotte, Rocky Mount. So ultimately what they're planning to do is for this first 6 months especially, they're going to be reaching out to other local HRCs to ask, how do they develop a work plan? What are the common concerns that they find that they're addressing in their communities to see if there are ways that they can narrow this in. They're also looking at the ordinance that established them, which does lay out a number of principles to be considered in the way we function as an advisory board to council, in the way that we address certain issues, and also reaching out to other departments across the city to say, hey, what does the Citizens Advisory Council do? What is the One High Point Commission doing right now? And the hope is to ultimately shape this into a further element of an orientation manual for new commissioners, so that this is something that's knowledge that's passed on. I think this kind of question has maybe been asked at least informally before, but has never been documented. And so that's been one of my kind of passions as in my role as the manager, is to try to develop a more consistent set of orientation, rules, regulations, ordinance. This is everything. This is a pack of how to get up to speed more quickly. So when we have some turnover on the commission, they're able to develop and get immediately engaged. So that's the first work plan item. And then the second one, as part of this process, they also asked staff, what are the things that we do in the office? We don't just support the commission. As you all know, we do a lot of different things. And one of the things that we identified is that we work with clients who just come into our office, often with concerns about housing, questions about fair housing, landlord-tenant relationships. And one small but important aspect of that is we have seen an increasing frequency of residents coming in with some mental health concerns. Some of this is as simple as they're coming in and asking to see, if we have any connections to social workers, or asking what are available resources that they can tap into. Or some of it has also been, and this is something that's always happened, they'll call in with a complaint, and through the process of the discussion, it's clear that there might be, say, schizophrenia involved, where the complaint is unlikely to have been based in reality, and it is instead a hallucination. How do we help those customers? We have some processes that we've developed in the office, of course, but we don't have formal relationships in any way with other actual mental health providers. And so this was suggested by Councilman Johnson that the commission do kind of some of this groundwork, that they study or identify mental health resources within the community and any gaps in High Point, that this could be developed into a pamphlet we could share more easily, or something that we could find another way to share this information with the community as there's greater need for that. From coming out of the pandemic for both, youth and adults. And so ultimately, this would be something that we anticipate reaching out to local mental health providers to get a better sense of the landscape. I know we're going to be reaching out to Family Service of the Piedmont, the Family Justice Center, possibly RHA, or other mental health providers, just to kind of say what is happening, and is there any way that the city could possibly assist in or encourage this. The last slide I have here is our ongoing subcommittee activities. As I said, a lot of that was recruitment, but now they're reaching the fruits of their labor. So the Social Justice Committee, after working with the police, it was a natural extension to then turn to this mental health work plan item. So they're going to be further developing that in terms of not only reaching out to some of the mental health workers, but also saying, what does this look like in terms of the actual community? So is this something that they could turn into maybe an event, a resource fair, or some other way to actually engage the community and work to help them. The second subcommittee, our interfaith subcommittee, is planning a multi-faith day of prayer event. So this is something that we have done many years before. We've done it annually for a lot of years. But of course, like all events, this was paused during the COVID pandemic, and as such, we're trying to resurrect that and bring that back again. We are planning that for May 4th, and all of you will, if you have not already, will receive an invite to that soon. We're currently developing a flyer for that. This is always held at the library's Arts and Education Plaza, and we do, especially this year, we're going to be doing an event in the morning before work, and then an event in the evening after work. So anyone can join that and be accessible, and we'd love to have you there. The third subcommittee, our international subcommittee, is also looking at some kind of event to engage our international residents. And one target date that they've identified to develop this would be Welcoming Week. This is something that we've participated again in the past. This year it's September 9th through the 17th. And this is an event sponsored by a national organization called Welcoming America. And they don't have any proscribed events or resources that you have to do, but it can be something where, say, you bring together and do a small festival, or maybe host a citizenship recognition ceremony for new North Carolinians. You provide some kind of educational resource, any kind of event that would show that we are wanting folks from all areas, all countries, to be a part of High Point, our international city. And so they don't have a specific event in mind, but they're hosting, hoping to put it in Welcoming Week, or possibly at Unity Festival, which is the following weekend, September 23rd. So that is our current activities, and any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you. I'll open it up to either end. I'm sure all of us have comments about this. We all love this. Go ahead, Councilmember Jefferson. We'll start. I'm just going to go down the table because I know all of us are excited about this.
So first, I just want to say thank you. I think what you all have done over the past couple of years to really look intentionally at what's happening here in our city, to see those opportunities to continue to improve outcomes for our residents. It's not something that should be taken lightly, so thank you. I'm excited Haven't seen what's come out of the last sort of biannual plans that you all put out, and the great sort of progress that's come from that gives me a lot of hope that we are continuing to build on good momentum. And it looks like what you all did back in, I guess it was January's retreat that you all hosted, was really good. I think doing that sort of survey or inventory, if you will, to know where the Human Relations Commission then aligns and can complement and work well and collaborate with some of the other commissions and things happening in the city. It's always a good way to be efficient and make sure that we're maximizing resources and potential. I'm also particularly intrigued about what we're doing here to look at those existing gaps and resources in terms of mental health supports. And we've heard from our police department, and I'm recalling a conversation maybe a couple of years ago when we were talking with Chief Stroud. And, one of the things he said that's so critical for them is that, we can support their growth and their workforce so they can be able to respond to some calls that really do need mental health professionals on scene to be able to help folks, whether they're in crisis or something of that sort. And so we're seeing it in a number of places. I've heard from constituents that they'd like to know that mental health support is a priority here in the city. And granted, I know the county is more of the Health and Human Services government entity, but still, as a city, where do we fit in? I guess is the main question. And so you all taking some time to look at that, I think can be instrumental, and I look forward to hearing the results from that.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
No.
Either one, Councilmember Lee.
Yeah,
Well, no, the only thing I was thinking early on, like when you were talking about, kind of seeing what everybody's doing is, I love that word collaboration, and I thank you for doing that, because that's how we really move the needle. So thank you, Ace, great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just kind of look at the subcommittee work, and I think about when we talk about the gaps, and some are seen and some are unseen. And I think if we look at the lingering effects of COVID and the pandemic and how that affected mental health, some of those things haven't necessarily come to the surface in certain populations. How has it affected our kids? How has it affected those who are under-resourced? And how do they get services to address things where normally they wouldn't have access to those as readily? And so being able to, as a city, form a comprehensive plan to be able to address our citizens and reach populations who may be under-resourced for things that we cannot see, planning for those things that may arise that we cannot necessarily plan for. And then I look at the subcommittees, and I look at the interconnectivity, the purposeful interconnectivity of these subcommittees, interfaith subcommittees. We do find that sometimes, even though faith normally binds us together, that we find that sometimes faith segregates us. To be able to do this and bring the city together in a purposeful manner, to introduce people who normally wouldn't interact with someone from another faith. I think as we look at how the city is moving forward in terms of equity for everyone, bringing everyone to the table, voicing for those who haven't necessarily had a voice, this is kind of one of the pivotal points, the kind of nexus points that will allow us to do that. And then, as we are the international city, as we have seen that development from business and populations have continued to grow internationally, having all of these subcommittees coming out of our human relations, which we know our most important resources are our people. I'm really impressed by just the comprehensive nature of how we're going to address this and go forward for our citizens. So, well done. And the fact that we do this biannually and we have a, kind of a reset point if we need to change direction, I think that's inspired. So thank you guys for the great work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Race. You do, your department does great work. To tag onto that, the last statistic I saw is that there are 10,000 Muslims in High Point. I don't want us to fall under the false assumption that we're giving someone, just a chance, because they're active citizens. They're a very valid part of our community. So I do want to agree with you there. Sandra, can you make sure that these go on our calendar as well? That day of prayer? Absolutely. Not only do I want to come, but I want to have other groups that I work with know about that. Something that Greensboro does that I hope that we can move toward is their police department has intermediaries, that work for their force. That I know of several who have undergraduate degrees in sociology, master's degrees in criminal justice. And they act as these intermediaries that if they have a mental health crisis, they have somebody that they can, that is on call that they can say, we need your help to come to this, to this call. And they can act as those mediaries because, our police department is not trained to handle mental health crises. It's really not, they can't be all things to all people. So I hope that we can move towards having, at least one person on call at all times that the police department can say, we need help, and can act as that intermediary. That's just me personally saying that. I think this is also a good time. I've been thinking about, we've been having conversations over the last few years about our minorities and women in business, discussed partnering with Greensboro on their disparity study, and theirs is now finished. And I would like us to continue that conversation. So I'm going to ask staff if they can bring back to this committee some information about, a consultant that we could use, the cost of such study, and just some information so that we can have something to discuss at a full council meeting possibly. So if staff can do that, I think that would be a good next step to continue that conversation.
Certainly do that.
Chairman Hudson, thank you for raising that point. And actually, if my memory serves me correctly, I know we've got this timeline for ARPA, and we've got to hear from our community, and we're getting some applications, and I think it just went live Monday, right? Yeah. So staff, thank you so much for that, by the way. I think about what the American Rescue Plan Act was enacted for, and what the language was about, and both from what we've seen in other examples of folks using that funding, and it seems that this kind of study is very apropos for that. And so I'd be curious, again, I don't know how those timelines can play well together, what it means for community applications, but if there's a way that we can have this conversation, leverage some ARPA funding, even to support that happening, perhaps there's an opportunity. So we'll see. Thank you for that.
Absolutely.
And I'd also like to add, Mr. Chairman, I think we talk about advantageous timelines. I think as we look at the work of the One High Point Commission, one of the policy prescriptions in there was to look at our MWBE and how it interacts with our communities. This is, we also said that when we granted the extension of One High Point, that any feasible items that we could bring forward to get into action now, that would, we would do that. And I think having all of this kind of, dovetail together allows us to cover a few bases at once. And so, I thank you for bringing that back up, because I think it covers, a lot of things that, we're working on simultaneously.
Absolutely, thank you. And
The
we
only
also
thing
have
I
approved.
The only thing I want to make sure is that if to make sure that council will have the appetite to act on the study. Like, I don't want to just, okay, we're going to do the study and then we're going to vote against acting on it. So I just want to make sure that if we're going to do the study, that we have appetite from council that we will act on it. So I don't know if that should come first or another discussion before we spend the money on the study.
Well, that's a good point. I think part of what I'm mindful of, and I appreciate you raising that point, Councilwoman Peters. I think staff's, based on when we funded the position for the MWBE, was it MWBE manager, coordinator? I can't remember what the coordinator. MWBE coordinator, yeah.
And that is in this year's budget.
Yeah, that's in this year's budget. And so I think staff, you all, I've not heard anything about that position being hired, but I don't know where we are in that process.
The update on that, if I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
we have had first interviews, and next week we are bringing 3 of the candidates back for second interviews.
Okay, nice.
So hopefully fairly soon we'll have that person on board.
Nice. I think to Councilwoman Peters' point, and it's so spot on, that, we have to be prepared to do a study, get the study back, right? And if it's got some results that we can act on, that we'd be willing to act on it, I would think that hopefully us getting the right candidate next week is a big first step towards that, and ensuring that the city is really serious about acting on whatever we may learn. And you know, ultimately, it was a part of a vision, I believe you all recall, May 2020, when we wrote out some of those initiatives, right, that we want to focus on here in the city to be that international city that we keep talking about. And I believe that was one of the things that we looked at back then. So this is 3 years in the making, and it's fantastic to see it continue to come to fruition, to where we've taken so many strides and we've seen the growth, we've seen the improvements, and to be where we are now, where we have the opportunity to hire an incredible NWBE professional who can be commensurate with where our vision is going, and be able to activate on the study, and then council really have the will behind it, which I'll tell you from everything I've heard, council has the will to back up going into it and doing the right kind of work. But I second everything you just said, Councilwoman Peters.
And to tag on, and kind of as an answer to you, this is a great starting point for that NWBE coordinator. This gives them the information that they need. And council has the responsibility of approving this. So by approving it, you know, they'll say, yes, we'll do what, you know, they're spending the money. We won't approve it unless full council approves it. It's not this committee cannot approve this, so it'll go to full council first.
Imagine coming in your first day, you find out you got to run a study. Yeah. Isn't that fun?
I think our next steps are to develop an RFP and issue
Right.
that, and have different contractors, vendors
Right.
submit for that.
Perfect. I think that's a great step. Good direction.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other discussion? I have one thing to tag on at the end. If there's anything else in the room, this won't take 30 seconds. Councilmember Jefferson asked about, I'm sorry.
Did you, I don't think that you actually voted on the item for the proposed plan.
I am so sorry.
I think it's to request to approve the two.
Yes. I will make a motion to approve and accept 2023-120, our 6-month plan from Human Relations Commission.
Second.
There is a motion on the floor and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously, and that'll go with the consent agenda item as well. Thank you for thank you for clarifying and keeping me on my toes. There was a question by Councilmember Jefferson when we had the tree plan presented to us of size of trees, why we do not have bigger trees downtown. How big can we get? I gave a really crummy answer to that question in the last meeting. Here's a better answer to it. To transplant trees, it's important the proportion between roots and leaves. So when a tree is really small, it has a lot of roots and a few leaves. As it grows, the canopy, the leaves get bigger. The roots don't grow as fast. They grow out, but not as hardy. So there's a point where you get a balance, and then there's a point where you break that balance. So at about 10 years, the canopy is too big to be supported by the roots. So if you plant a large tree in the ground, the roots don't have enough area to bring water into the tree. So in order to not kill that balance, you can only plant it that has a certain amount of leaves on. So that's the breaking point of this is how big we can actually plant. The other part, and here's a really crucial difference, these are going on pavement. So if you plant a tree that's 50-50 roots, leaves, and you plant it on pavement, it's probably going to die because it's not established enough. So you really do need to give it a lot more tender care going into pavement, because it's, you have a 10-degree difference than you do in the woods. So that's a better answer to the question. My first answer was crummy and rambling, so that's a more concise answer to that question.
Thank you.
Is there anything else today?
No, thank you.
Great meeting, great discussion, everybody. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.